Fantasmagorium show is proud to present Webs, Gliders, and Spiders, a show with not enough power to require any responsibility. All right, let's do this one last time. A spider bit Miles. So many other things. Pete dies, but he doesn't. It's different. Octavia or Olivia Octavius intrigues me. Gwen, the Kingpin is a Dick Tracy villain. Heavens, we are across the multiverse now. My name is ScottyR37. Kat told you to take it outside, and Steve wants pictures of Spider-Man. Tally ho.
Tally ho.
That's what I got from this. How did you feel about when was the first time that you saw Spider-Man Into the Spider-Man verse?
I first saw this in theaters in March 2019. It was not a re-release. It had stayed in theaters for 3 months. It had just won the Oscar for Best Animated Film, and I didn't have any expectations. Everybody in my friend group online were saying, "You gotta see this. You gotta see that." I'm like, oh, okay, because like everybody else, I didn't think it was going to be that great. Because usually the animated movies usually the direct-to-video, you haven't seen animated superhero movies that much, at least that type of animation. And I was pleasantly surprised. I'm like, damn, that was a really good movie. Like better than it had any right to be. For 2D animated, especially coming from Sony, given the things they've been doing with the Spider-Man property in the years prior to that. And so I'm like, wow, they did a really good job on this.
Well, and when you refer to what they've been doing with the Spider-Man property previously, are you referring to like just animation in general, or are you talking about the Amazing Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man 2?
Like Spider-Man 3, the Amazing Spider-Man 2, and it's like you had 3 kind of duds in a row there. And granted, they had since done Homecoming, but that was more of a Marvel Studios influence than Sony Pictures influence. Mm-hmm. And so to see this one be as good as it was, I was very, very pleasantly surprised by that.
I find this to be a complete and total reboot.
Well, it's a different character, so yeah.
Right. And so that disassociates me from my remembrance of Spider-Man.
Well, what do you mean?
I mean that when I go to a Spider-Man movie, I want to see about Peter Parker, and this movie does well. And I don't want to say that it's like Miles Morales is not my Spider-Man. Miles Morales is the Spider-Man for the people who are younger than me. Yeah. My Spider-Man will always be Peter Parker.
Yeah.
And so being invested in a new character who is taking the mantle of Spider-Man, it's difficult for me to wrap around. Yeah. This movie does a great job of getting me to wrap around it. But when it comes down to it, this is a story that is about Miles Morales and not Peter Parker.
Right. Well, Miles Morales also, he has history in the comics. I had heard the name before, but I had not read and still have not read a single Miles Morales comic, so I had no idea what to expect from it. Mm-hmm. I was very impressed with how they handled the family dynamics. They got me to care about it like immediately. Like it wasn't like
the mom is underdeveloped in the first one.
A little bit, yeah. But then, but I thought that with the father and the uncle and then him, I thought that was really well done. And unlike, say, the Tobey Maguire thing where you had the May and Ben were more like grandparents in a way. And I felt that, like in the Maguire one, Maguire's always in a rush to do something. He's not really listening to Uncle Ben and what Ben's trying to tell him. Whereas in this one, I felt like Miles wanted to listen to him because he keeps trying to tell his father, it's like, look, I don't want to go to private school. I don't want to, this is not who I am. Let me go to public school. I'd be with my peers. And Dad's like, what are you talking about? These are your peers. I'm like, are they really? And then the uncle is like, the cool uncle who totally gets it. And so it's like, man, they're really doing a good job at just hitting all these beats like really quickly to get that, out of the way. And I like that his uncle, they tease it early where Miles tells his dad, what's wrong if I end up like, like Uncle Aaron? He's cool. And his dad kind of, because they never really resolve how much the father knew about what Uncle Aaron was doing. because spoilers. When Uncle Aaron
Prowlers.
spoilers when Miles's dad finds his brother Aaron dead, he doesn't seem to have a reaction to seeing him in the Prowler outfit. Like he has a bigger reaction to his belief that Spider-Man killed him, but he doesn't seem to be freaking out that what are you doing as a Prowler? Does it's because he clearly knew something because Miles is like, what's wrong with turning out like Uncle Aaron? And the dad kind of.
No, I think it's because Uncle Aaron is very much of the criminal underground. It is represented in previous movies that we've watched, even with what is it, Homecoming?
Yeah.
We had Uncle Aaron being the Prowler, and so that's the kind of guy. When I was watching the Prowler, I was thinking of Donald Glover.
Right, but I mean, like when I was in this movie, it's not clear how much like this is like. Does Miles's dad actually know that Aaron works for the Kingpin?
No.
Right. And so that's what I was wanting, because he clearly knows that his brother's into something dirty, but I don't think he knows exactly how deep it goes. But I like that they set up that dynamic pretty quickly. I especially like the kind of strain that it's putting on his relationship with Miles as well. Because you can tell that Miles just feels like his dad doesn't listen to him and doesn't really have an interest in understanding him or the things that he's upset about. And I like that when the spider does bite him, it's kind of, in a sense, it's out of left field. Like, oh, there's a spider here, and it kind of happens. It's not going to be the original, like, oh, let's go to the museum or go to the science lab, and and they don't make a thing about it in the first one. Like they never question in the first movie where the spider came from, or like why did this happen? It just sort of, it just kind of happens, and then Miles is kind of just off to the races with it. And I did like the Chris Pine Peter Parker, because he felt a lot like Spider-Man as well.
I thought it was great. I thought that that this is where I connect to Spider-Man is through Peter Parker, and so I thought it was great. It was, hey, you and I watched No Time to Die, and one of my favorite things was James Bond dying.
Yeah,
and this was interesting to see Peter Parker die.
Yeah, like that was a scene too.
It was really brutal. Like, I'm not knocking that. It was like, what do you guys want to see Spider-Man lose? No. But it was really impactful. No pun intended. Because if you haven't seen it, the Kingpin, he takes like double fists. He's big. He looks like a trailer park. Not just a trailer, the entire park.
Yeah, he does. He is like freakishly huge, more so than the other Kingpins, but I also like how even his character gets, like, you find out what he's up to rather quickly. Like much like they hinted at in the Netflix live action version of he has a relationship and he's managing to keep his business life secret from that. And then in the flashback, his wife and kid come home and see him trying to kill Spider-Man, and they freak out and they flee into the night and get killed in a car accident. And so now he's trying to use this Hadron Collider to open the multiverse to bring them back and blah, blah, blah. And I like how it gets right to the point. It's really simple, but they don't bog it down in a bunch of unnecessary baggage. It's like, here's who he is. Here's what he's motivated by, the end. Which is something they repeat with other villains in a villain in the next one as well. They just get down to basics, make it simple. So we don't need to have a protracted origin story for the villain like in other superhero movies. Let's keep the focus on Miles. And so I was surprised that after they killed Spider-Man, that it's like, okay, so there is a Spider, because again, I had no idea what the lore was of the Miles Morales character. I didn't know that it's supposed to be like the same New York or Peter Parker also exists. Mm-hmm. And so when he kills Peter Parker and you have the funeral and everybody's there, and it's like, man, that was kind of tense. And you had that nice little cameo by Stan Lee.
Second eventually
to last.
Eventually it fits.
Yes. Yeah, eventually it fits. No refunds. No returns and no refunds and no exchanges. But I did find it funny that the Jake Johnson, or was that his name, Jake Johnson? Peter
Jake Gyllenhaal?
No.
Jake
his Peter
Robertson?
B.
Robbie Robertson?
His Peter B. Parker is pretty much a riff on the Tobey Maguire version of Spider-Man. Like
Yes.
his whole backstory that they rushed through is like it's basically the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, but with only very slight alterations. Even the way they animated MJ looked almost a bit like Kirsten Dunst, a little bit. And I thought that was a little. I thought that was kind of like, a little bit. I thought I'm like, okay, so it's like they're kind of telling us what happened to his character. Because again, this is pre No Way Home. So
hang on.
Yeah.
So I think that when they animated Mary Jane, that she looked very much like a cross of Emma Stone and Kirsten Dunst. So the aesthetics of Mary Jane, I think, were brought together for Mary Jane between both love interests who were in peril. And when you get to Spider-Gwen, who is not Gwen Stacy.
Right.
Not the Gwen Stacy that I know.
Well,
I don't know any
from a different thing, yeah.
But I don't know anything about Spider-Gwen except for seeing her image. Like I know what she looks like, but I don't know Spider-Gwen's origin or backstory or whatever. Until this movie, of course. Pardon me. So I like everything is so topsy-turvy.
It's from the Miles Morales version of the universe.
Which isn't my universe.
It wasn't mine either, but I didn't have a problem following the story.
Right. But one of the things that makes Marvel stories sort of captivating is that they exist in the real world. Like I know people complain about product placement and the like. But when Tony Stark wants a Burger King Whopper, I'm like, okay, so this takes place in my world. And the Miles Morales universe is the ultimate Spider-Man universe, which is not believable enough. Like if I wanted that, I would read the comics. It is very well brought to the screen, but how did you feel? How did you feel about the Miles Morales universe, Green Goblin?
I was confused by that because it's like he's like this Hulk. He's like a cross between the Hulk and the Goblin, and I didn't really care because again, this is Miles Morales, and I assume the Green Goblin is not his nemesis. That's more like a Peter Parker thing. So, and again, because again, I haven't read the Miles Morales comics. I still don't, so I don't exactly know who his arch enemy is or what the again what the lore is. So I'm like, yeah, it's a very different version of the universe. So I was like, whatever. Because plus the Goblin's only there for a cameo because this isn't the Peter Parker story; it's the Miles Morales story.
No, I know, but do you just automatically accept the fact that the Green Goblin is going to be a giant monster person?
Yeah,
like a killer croc? You're okay?
I'm not sure if he came from. Well, and that's another thing. I don't like. Is it supposed to be the same? Is it supposed to be the Goblin from that universe, or is that something that came out of the Collider as well?
Sorry, which?
Like, is that supposed to be the Norman from their universe, or did he come out of the Collider as well?
No, everything that is happening at the very beginning of the movie until they open up the Collider, part of the reason why Peter Parker dies is because they open up the Collider and then it does the whole wonky explosion.
But he had been bitten by the spider at that point?
I believe he had. He got bit by the spider when, like, around the same time as he did his mural that Aaron took.
Yeah, but that was before he went to the Collider and they turned it on with, Spider-Man dying.
Right. But then he goes back. Then the
Collider was turned on before then.
But he goes
not on screen, off screen. It would have had to have happened as well. I can't tell you why. It's a spoiler for the second one.
Oh no! Do they retcon parts of Spider-Man or across the Spider-Verse, or into the Spider-Verse? Do they change what happens through
No, they don't change what happens.
contextual.
They add more information to it to have a very fascinating plot twist late in the film
Ooh,
that has to do with
continuity.
why Miles Morales is Spider-Man and why his Peter Parker died in the first place.
Is it because his parents genetically engineered things?
No, that's not. They're not taking things from those movies. But anyway, so it may be the Goblin came from there, maybe not. But it's like one of those one-off things, kind of like in the trailer when you see the Vulture for Across the Spider-Verse. It's like a one-off thing, and so again, it didn't really matter. There's a bunch of different versions of villains from comics. I didn't care that it was a hulking whatever because this isn't the same story. And plus, it was
but it's not a correct representation of the character that I knew from the comic books or the previous films. I understand that that is the character design from the Ultimate books, which is where Miles Morales comes from.
Are you saying that's accurate? Are you saying the Goblin in this movie was accurate to the Ultimate Spider-Man?
Yes.
Well, then then there's no problem then, because that's what it is.
But you're using it as math, and I'm talking about that's not my favorite iteration of Spider-Man. So when it's an adaptation of something, like I am aware of the Ultimate Comics run. It is where they introduced Miles Morales.
Okay.
And when it comes to the hulking Green Goblin, not my favorite Green Goblin. Like this movie begs for sort of fan service.
No, I think it has a compelling story there. It's not just fan service.
But Miles Morales begs fan service to a certain extent. Oh, wait, no. I'm incorrect. Miles Morales is a compelling character, and I enjoy everything about the dynamic between his uncle, his father, and his introduction to the Spider-Verse through his peers.
Right.
Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with Miles Morales, and this is a great movie for people who want to learn about Miles Morales Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Peter Parker is my Spider-Man, and I want to learn more about him. But you learn a heck of a lot about him. Like I really enjoy the melancholy of at the beginning of the movie Spider-Man dies, and then you get a new Spider-Man who didn't die. And then you find out in that particular universe, he comes back and he's like, even though I won, it didn't go well. For his own personal life.
Right.
But that kind of undercuts Peter Parker.
Well, it's playing up something that they also pay off in the sequel. In terms of
I haven't seen it. Is it any good?
It's very good, but in terms of what we see Peter do for Miles in this one versus what Miles does for him in the next one, or when they do eventually get reunited and he realizes what effect that he had on Peter, which he didn't realize the first time around. But that Peter Parker feels like, again, there's a lot of clear riffs on the Maguire storyline, and it's almost like they're saying that this is what happened afterwards, and blah blah blah, and it's not. He's kind of in a soft spot or whatever, and he's not really interested in helping Peter. But like when he tries to use the great power, great response, like don't you dare finish that sentence. He had enough of here. It's like I don't need a little kid guilt tripping me on that who's only been Spider-Man for like a day, And so when they go to the headquarters and you see the new Doc Ock. Again, I'm assuming that's comics accurate to somewhere or not, or they just made it up. I'm not really sure.
What, Lady Doc Ock?
Yeah.
No, from what I understand, it's just for this flick.
Okay.
But I dig Olivia. I liked Olivia Octavius. I thought, you know what? I was like, you know what? Everything's a multiverse anyway already in this movie, so we might as well make her a lady. I don't care.
Yeah, that
It's
was fun.
Catherine. You know who plays her though? It's Catherine Hahn, who's also Agatha. So it was Agatha all along.
I also found it interesting that in the Miles Morales universe, Aunt May is not only aware that Peter is
That was
Spider-Man.
Lily Tomlin.
Yeah, not only is she aware that he's Spider-Man, but she has this whole high-tech spider headquarters in her backyard, and she's totally on board with the whole Spider-Man thing, which I thought was kind of like a nice payout, because like we mentioned in the original Spider-Man trilogy, that it was a question of how much does Aunt May know, and that kind of thing, where in the second one it seems like maybe she does know, but in the third one it seems like she doesn't, and it's kind of going waffling back and forth. And even the design of their house with the shed in the back or the detached garage looks kind of the same
As the Raimi ones, yeah.
Yeah, as the Raimi one, and even the animation for Aunt May even though the way the character moved and spoke seemed a lot younger than the Rosemary Harris one, her face and her look still, and her hair still seemed a bit like that's kind of what they're going, like a hybrid or something. So that I thought, okay, so Aunt May's here and she's like really on board with it, almost like the progression of what you would want to see, even though obviously the Maguire Aunt May didn't stay in her house because she had to move into an apartment. But
yes,
and that was another kind of surreal thing when he's seeing Aunt May again and he's like, I'm not your Peter, and she doesn't really care because it's just nice to see Peter again.
Well, and yeah,
because the Peter who dies at the beginning is like the perfect Spider-Man, and the Peter who's showed up here is like midlife crisis. I mean, he's not old enough. He's not middle-aged yet, but he's acting like it, and like he's a total crash on the couch in my mom's basement, so I'm 40 type of characterization in a way.
But also, like in middle-aged Peter's universe, May had died. That's part of the reason why he and Mary Jane drifted apart. I think that's let's do this for the last time. I think that's one of those backstories where it was just like, here's what happened. And so when he finally gets to see Aunt May again, it's cathartic, and it's nice to know that Aunt May is just like, I know, buddy. And I just, the way that they talk about the different continuities and the different lore and origins and whatever, I think it was very emotionally satisfying in the way that they told all of those stories.
I did do some research, and each of them are pulled from either one-off comics from the past or other runs, so they didn't make any of them up.
Even the robot one, little girl robot one.
Yeah, I think there was a slight tweak on that. Like that might have been the one they took the most creative license with from the original, whatever the original iteration was, because that was buried in another comic that was a lot more recent, I think from 2014. So she's probably the most recent creation. But then you have Spider-Ham, who's from the 80s.
Peter Porker.
Yeah, Peter. Oh my God, that actually exists, And then,
it did. I knew about him.
And it did. And then the Spider-Man Noir was my favorite, but it didn't have very many issues for its spinoff. But
it was a limited series, from what I understand.
Yeah, and Nicolas Cage was great. He had some of the best lines in that movie. Sometimes I light a match and let it burn my fingers just to feel things.
Yeah, but it's a parody. It's a parody of noir comics.
Yeah, exactly. And it works, and it was really funny, and I liked that character a lot. But I was surprised also by the amount of heart that was in the movie. Like when they all don't think that he's really, Miles isn't ready to be Spider-Man. And how it just causes him to run off and find out what happened to his uncle, and then fleeing. And then despite being upset that they don't think he's ready for it, in a sense they seem to have that point validated when, upon learning that his uncle is the Prowler, he runs straight back to the Spider-Man again in a panic. Because again, he hasn't really had his big Uncle Ben moment yet. And so so I love it when he runs in there, he's like, oh, my uncle's the Prowler, and he's trying to kill me. And he's like, Spider-Man Noir's like, man, it's a pretty hardcore origin story.
Well, it is self-referential, in that way.
Exactly. So much of the movie is self-referential. Like even when the Scorpion comes in, is that they have prongs? Yeah. And so that whole stuff happens, but One of
Please
my
continue,
favorite
sir.
scenes is one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when Peter ties him up in his apartment and he leaves him there. And he's like, if you can do this, then get past me. And he can't. And the others turn out to be just sitting right outside the window on the wall, listening and feeling bad for him. And then when having the followed up with the dad stepping outside the room, like sometimes people drift apart, Miles, like, oh, this is so good. It's like, wasn't there a moment like this in some of the other Spider-Man films?
You know what? I think I think it's a manipulation of animation.
In what way?
I think that the framing, the way that the close-ups work, the if you saw a close-up to an emotional face that was live action, let's say Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield or Emma Stone, I don't care. Take your pick. It's not going to be as emotionally evocative as something that was created specifically to be emotionally evocative, like in an animation.
You can make the exact same argument about live action. It is completely
But I'm
manipulative, and they're directing each. It's not like they're playing out the whole scene. They're directing by each different camera angle and trying to evoke, the same thing. So, it doesn't
You
really
find
matter.
my argument invalid.
Right, but it doesn't matter what the medium is. If you're still invested in the characters and it works, then and all movies are emotionally manipulative because none of it's real. Like it's
Hey,
all.
I'm saying I'm thinking that it works better in Into the Spider-Verse. I think it works better with those emotions being conveyed in that hyper, like, I won't even say realistic, but that hyper world.
Well, yeah, because animation has this neat thing where it's like the pacing also is very different. Like, for instance, most cartoon shows consist of 2 11-minute skits. Well, the first 11 minutes of a live action movie goes by like that. Whereas an 11-minute cartoon skit, it's not that it feels a lot longer, not in the sense that it feels slow, but you can, because of the way animation works, the zippiness, the pacing, you can get a lot more done in 11 minutes of animation, story-wise and character-wise, than you can in 11 minutes of live action.
Yeah.
Which is why you're able to get all of these really key character relationships between like the father and the uncle and the other done so fast with just these simple beats, because animation kind of lends itself to that.
Why is that? Why can you convey more information more quickly through animation?
I don't know why. It's something I honestly do find to be kind of baffling. Like, for instance,
it's interesting though.
It is. Like, for instance, all of these hollow Disney live action remakes are all like 40 minutes longer than their counterparts, but they're like cookie cutter adaptations. They didn't like add a bunch of new scenes. It's like the same scenes, but because it's live action, it's taking longer because they're trying to emulate, real life and the real world, and the pacing and the movement is not as zippy and bouncing off the walls as you have in animation, so you don't get as much of that done. But the illusion
that reminds me, go over to Cinema Gulp. We talked about one of the songs from The Little Mermaid. It was right. By Aquafina.
But but that's kind of a neat trick that animation can do that live action doesn't. And I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
I was talking. Oh, sorry, you were
so it's kind of like, that's the thing. The trick at animation is able to get away with that, but they also can get away with doing less. Like, for instance, in any of the live action Spider-Man movies, you usually have multiple scenes between the same characters before you've developed a relationship that the audience really ties into. Animation, it just seems to work it clicks almost immediately. For instance, in the scene when Miles' dad is on the other side of the door saying sometimes people drift apart, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, because it's like, well, what has he done so far? It's like he said he didn't want to go to private school and he snuck out for a couple of days. That's really all he did. There was and we didn't get any indication that they'd been drifting apart before the events of the movie, or because he was, even when he's driving him to school in the beginning, he's kind of joking around with him. Like, he doesn't seem to think they're on a different wavelength. And so when you see the father standing outside the door so dejected that we drift apart and blah, 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 it's like, it almost felt like there was something missing there, but the scene works. Like it feels like there's more to that backstory that they don't fill you in on. And granted, the uncle had just died, which is partly why the father is so dejected, because that was his brother. But again, it's that point that animation can get away with skipping.
Well, that's like I hate to go back to character, but you brought us here to this alley. Is that Spider-Man is responsible for the death of his uncle in this instance?
Not really, because Kingpin killed him.
But the reason that Kingpin killed him is because Aaron wouldn't kill Miles.
Right, but that's Aaron's deal. That's not Miles's fault.
Well, but it is Miles's fault for being there, and he had responsibility. Like he like let's.
Well, he did go back to.
Let's be fair. Miles is more powerful than both Aaron and the Kingpin.
Maybe. I mean, the Kingpin seemed to handle Spider-Man pretty well at the beginning when he killed him.
That's because, well, those were extenuating circumstances.
Also, I would argue that Miles was being responsible, because when he found out that his uncle was a Prowler, he ran back to the more experienced Spider people to tell them about it.
How did Spider-Man die in the beginning?
Kingpin,
I remember he did die, but I don't know how.
The explosion of the collider,
how was he bested?
Landed down on the ground.
And he was trying to save Miles.
Yeah, he was trying to save Miles, and that's
so it was Miles' fault
in the next film as well. But yeah, Kingpin. But anyway, Aaron decided that he wanted to kill Spider-Man, but wouldn't kill Miles. But Miles was, he went back to the house and did the right thing. He went to get the people who could handle it, and then they got ambushed. But I also like other moments, like when they're sneaking into Kingpin's, like the gala that he's throwing, and Peter runs into MJ, and it's not his MJ, but he's still feeling really cathartic about it and trying to make up for the relationship, which is in a way kind of like that scene in Endgame when Tony meets his father and he can't tell him obviously that he's his son or what's going on, but you could tell he's trying to make amends with his dad because he didn't end it on good terms with him before. And that's kind of like what Peter's doing here with MJ, even though it's not his MJ, and he's trying to,
Who directed this film?
I think it was actually, wasn't it Lord directed by Bob Perschetti, Peter Ramsey, and Rodney Rothman.
Who sings the next movie? I mean, directs.
I think it's the same people. Oh yeah, this by the way, the 4K was included with my 4K Blu-ray player. Free, pretty cool.
Do you still have the 4K Blu-ray player?
I do, but it doesn't work. It's in the attic. I'm using my PS5 for that now.
Nice.
Much better.
Does it work better? Do you like the PS5?
Yeah, it doesn't freeze discs, doesn't skip, none of that stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, so I liked how the movie was handling that, because in this one, yes, there's other characters from the multiverse, but because this is the first time we're seeing this movie, it doesn't strike me as much as a multiverse type thing. It's like, oh, here's another character who happens to be Spider-Man. There's another character who happens to be Spider-Man, but they're still trying to solve the same issue within this universe, which is the Kingpin.
Well, they're all gonna die if they don't get back to their own universes.
Right, because they keep like spazzing out and having issues, and so
spazzing out. I don't think we're allowed to say that.
I don't even know what
glitch.
Whatever. People used to use the word spaz for freaking out or whatever. So whatever.
No, but I don't think we can say it.
I'm not up to speed with the.
I'm just saying, don't say spaz.
I'm not up to speed with the hypersensitive people, but whatever.
I'm hypersensitive.
You are not. That's a lie. Okay, so yeah, I really did love this movie because I wasn't expecting it to have that type of emotion to it. I bought into the relationship between Miles and Peter B. Parker, and how Peter's clearly trying to help out. Like, yeah, he's like midlife crisis type and seems kind of like a slob at times, but he does eventually really get to Miles and does own up to the responsibility aspects of it, whereas Miles keeps trying to impress him and eventually does so when he comes out of his shell and comes back with the suit in the end in the collider for the big showdown, which I thought he did a good job on, while still having the issue of instead of having a J. Jonah Jameson character, it's hating Spider-Man. It's his own dad who hates him without realizing it's Spider-Man.
But they erase that so quick.
Yeah, in the end of this movie, but then
he just ends up showing and does, and Miles puts on a voice and he's like, "Oh no," and yes, that is a direct quote. But and then he goes and he hugs, and it's like, okay, you set up a really interesting dynamic. My uncle is dead. My dad thinks that Spider-Man killed his brother. My dad is also a cop, and it's, as you said, it's better than a J. Jonah setup. And then
he did leave him the proof that Kingpin was actually responsible.
Yeah,
so that's part of it. He doesn't blame Spider-Man anymore now that he understands that it was Kingpin who did it. Like,
All right. You all right? I think it's I think they let people off the hook a little too easily at the end. But I haven't seen the second one.
Yeah, the second one does different versions of that too with other characters, which is interesting.
Retcons?
No, not retcons. It's just adding things. Like, for instance, you mentioned in this movie, we don't really learn much about Gwen, whereas the first 15 minutes of the sequel is all of Gwen's backstory and her whole deal.
Nice.
Which is like, oh, okay, So, and I like that they don't explicitly retcon anything. It's just that they add more pieces to the puzzle, so to speak. Like, this one doesn't feel like a multiverse movie. It's like, yes, you have characters coming from the multiverse, but we don't travel into the multiverse in this one. We just stay in the Miles Morales, New York, and we don't go anywhere else. But we just have, for the most part, Spider-Man characters, but not other, Spider-Man villains getting involved. And
you know what really bothers me about Across the Spider-Verse?
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't give two cares about Spider-Man 2099.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think the marketing kind of misled people to think he was going to have a ton of screen time. He doesn't really show up to have a big role until, like, he's there early, but then he doesn't show up again until really late in the game.
You know how there was evil Chris Pratt in Lego Movie 2?
I did not see that.
You didn't see Lego Movie 2?
I haven't even seen the Lego Movie.
Oh.
I saw the Lego Batman movie, but I didn't see either of the Lego movies.
I didn't see the Lego Baccarat movie.
Yeah.
No, because we did a review of it, and I said I didn't. You can all check that out on the Fantasmagorium show. It's a movie that I didn't see, and it's the only one that I haven't seen so far.
So what about the evil Chris Pratt thing?
Well, that's what the speaking of movies that I haven't seen, that's what it feels like, is that Spider-Man 2099 is going to be the evil Chris Pratt from the Lego Movie 2.
Well, it's funny because even though the villain or the antagonist because villain and antagonist are two separate things. The antagonist of Across the Spider-Verse is the Spot, voiced by Jason Schwartzman, who kind of antagonizes the big mission that is the focus of the film.
Sure.
But I feel that given what Spider-Man 2099 is doing and what he's trying to accomplish, what he's trying to maintain, that he's the villain of the film. But it doesn't have his villain turn till very late, so to speak. I think that it's kind of...
Does he kill somebody?
No, I'm not going to go into any further.
No, I want to know. Spoilers. Does he kill somebody?
Does he kill somebody? Not yet.
What do you mean yet?
Because it's Across the Spider-Verse is a two-parter. It ends on a cliffhanger. And it's going to be 9.5 months.
What's the cliffhanger?
I'm not telling you the cliffhanger right now.
Why not? You got to.
People watching this may not have seen the movie yet and might want to see it who want to listen to our review.
Spoilers.
No, I will spoil that in the review.
All right, Catherine, you are a better person than I. Subscribe to the Fantasmagorium, where we have guardians for spoilers.
For instance, I got this collectible ticket from the theater when I went to see it, and that's Spider-Man 2099, and you can tell he looks kind of aggressive in that, just the general design. He's kind of a prick. Very.
Is he voiced by Poe Dameron?
Yes, Oscar Isaac. I would call him the Spock of all the Spider-Men.
Ooh, that's interesting.
He is very logic-driven. Logic, algorithms, calculations, like fate, expectation. Like, this is supposed to happen in your story, blah, blah, blah. And let's not deviate from the path, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But not much heart. Like, he's too focused on what is logical and what is rational to him rather than, what.
Does he time travel? I guess he does. He has to.
No, but no, because technically it's not time traveling if you're visiting different multiverses whenever. But that's a whole other conversation. Anyway, this movie, I like that. What my point was in bringing this up is that I like that this movie stays within the Miles Morales New York. And yes, you have other Spider-Men there, but they didn't make up different versions. They plucked them from different alternate, comic lines or whatnot. And I found that they each had something to serve. Like even something as ridiculous as Peter Porker, or whatever his name was, ends up having like their own little moment in this movie. It's not just all the. Sometimes you get some funny laughs in there where he's like, "Is it normal for animals to talk in your universe?" And stuff like that. And I like Liev Schreiber as the Kingpin, the voice, like just really kind of intimidating and just like there. But I really love this movie. The animation style is gorgeous too for 2D animation. I haven't seen a 2D animated film that looked that good in a long time. I wish they would make more 2D animated films. Not everything has to be 3D CGI. But this was I thought very well done. And I did like Miles, his character. He's younger. Like he's like a high school kid, but he also feels like a high school kid. And that's another benefit that animation can give you, is that we're not going to cast somebody in their 20s and tell them to, or cast somebody who's 30 and tell them to act like a teenager. Like Miles is animated so that he feels 15 or something, even though, he is 15, even though he's voiced by like, I think Shamik Moore is like maybe, I think he was 22, 23 when he voiced this. But the characterizations there really work. And I had no idea, by the way, about the Prowler character or who the Prowler was. So when that reveal came, I was like, oh shit, it's like I didn't see that coming. So that was kind of a good surprise for me, especially since I didn't think he was going to die, because I didn't know the Miles Morales story. I didn't think that Aaron was going to become like his version of Uncle Ben. So I figured that because it's a different character, they would do something totally different to achieve that, instead of necessarily killing somebody. So when that story goes the way that it does, it all seemed very fresh and new. Like, oh, wow, they're going to do this. Oh, it's him, that kind of thing. So that was another reason I responded very well to the film and the way that it worked.
And I appreciate being led on a new narrative path while watching a Spider-Man movie. And I did appreciate, like, I liked seeing Miles Morales' journey against the backdrop of other Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came down to it, watching a Spider-Man movie with, I guess it was chock-a-block full of Spider-Man. So, I don't know. I guess I would say that I would prefer my Spider-Man movies about Peter Parker.
I feel, as I've had in the past, that we had 5 of the regular Spider-Man version Peter Parker movies with the Maguire and Garfield films. We then had the MCU version, which is sort of like when we see Spider-Man pop up in Avengers comics and crossovers, and Civil Wars and all that kind of thing. We saw that with the Tom Holland character, and so given the appeal of Spider-Man, Not Peter Parker necessarily, but Spider-Man, who's my second favorite superhero after Batman. I liked the idea that it was a whole new character, even though there's still kind of some parallels with Peter. They're both kids from New York. They're both, familial problems, blah, blah, blah. So I dug it. I didn't have anything against it because it's its own thing. It's not, it's running in conjunction against the MC.
How do you feel about Terry McGinnis?
Which one's that again?
That's the Batman Beyond.
Right. I liked that. I thought it was. I was an advocate for doing a Batman Beyond movie, like people have been saying. It's like have Michael Keaton play Batman in a Batman Beyond thing, and have Terry McGinnis there. It's like, why not? It's like, yeah, it's true that it's not Batman Bruce Wayne, but I wasn't against it entirely. I thought it was okay for what it was.
Well, and that's what I'm saying in terms. I'm trying to sort of reconcile my understanding of Miles Morales.
Like 5 or 6 different Robins throughout the course of the Batman, universe.
No, but we're talking about the primary hero here. We're differentiating Spider-Man, Batman, and if you can have a Batman, if you can have a Batman Beyond who is Terry McGinnis, and you could have a Spider-Man 2099. You saw the movie. What's that guy's name?
Miguel O'Hara.
And then you also have Miles Morales, another Spider-Man. Like, these people are the Batman Beyonds.
Yeah, but it's kind of like in the comics, there are characters who, this like name is the name of 5 different heroes, and or multiple heroes with this secret identity in the comics. Like there's been several different these characters or that characters, and it's like. It's kind of like that, except Miles Morales has more popular. I guess it's more staying power because they picked him to be, the main character for these films.
Well, Miles Morales is sort of the one that Peter Parker, much like in the movie, in the comics, he is the one who, like Peter says, you do it. So, like, I'm paraphrasing poorly. Right. But he, like Peter Parker does sort of say, you're the guy. And so part of the thing that Miles Morales goes through is like, well, Peter Parker told me, and Peter Parker was Spider-Man. And so I got to do it because, Spider-Man told me that I was Spider-Man. So if I remember correctly, if I'm wrong, yell at me.
Yes, I could do a fast recap if you want. We haven't done one in a while.
But you said no spoilers.
No, for the sequel. No spoilers for the sequel in this video because other people.
Yeah, but I don't want to recap for this movie.
Okay. Anybody in the comments?
No.
Sharing.
No one is watching this.
Really?
Well, you know what? Do you want to do a recap of this movie and see if anyone joins?
Okay, so it's really fast, basically.
All right. Take your time. The
movie starts with we're introduced to Miles Morales. Regular kid. His parents are sending him to like this prep school. He doesn't want to go. His dad's not really listening to him about it. He goes to hang out. He sneaks out one night so he can go hang out with his cool Uncle Aaron, and they go down into the sewers somewhere to do this great graffiti art, and they're really bonding over that. And Miles gets bitten by this radioactive spider. The next day at school, he starts like really tripping out, and the typical Spider-Man, like kind of like what you saw with Maguire, where his hands are sticking to everything and the webs are shooting around, and he can't figure out what's going on. And he meets Gwen there. And,
no, he doesn't have the webs. That's right,
he doesn't have the web. He's just sticking to things. And he meets Gwen there.
Miles Morales is gifted the web shooters.
Right. So so he meets Gwen, and they're kind of hitting it off a bit, but eventually he gets away. Well, sort of. And
I don't believe in interracial coupling.
The big action ends up happening is Peter Parker, the Spider-Man of this universe, is having to deal with this big collider that the Kingpin has built, and he's trying to lure Goblin back into it. And Miles is only discovering this because he returned to the site of the graffiti to find the spider that bit him. because he determined that that's probably where this all originated from.
He goes back and finds it, yeah.
He goes back and finds it, but then he overhears the fight. He sees Spider-Man fighting this hulking Green Goblin, and Kingpin shows up, and there's this giant Hadron Collider, and Spider-Man's trying to prevent it from being turned on. But because Miles intervenes, Peter is unable to stop it because he saves Miles instead. He gets injured, cornered by Kingpin, who then kills him.
Double fist.
Right, but not before he gifted Miles this flash drive, which he said, don't lose this. This is really, important.
Don't break it.
Don't break it. You're gonna need it to shut down the collider. And of course, as Miles escapes with Kingpin putting a hit out on him, Miles takes off and starts practicing being Spider-Man. He's been gifted the web shoot. He's trying to figure out what he's gonna do, and he does end up breaking the flash drive at one point during one of his failed, tests from jumping off a building.
I don't blame him.
Yeah, so he wants to find out more about himself, so he goes to this comic shop and he buys a Spider-Man comic, which I thought was kind of neat, and he buys a Spider-Man
from Stan Lee.
Yeah, and he buys the comic from Stan Lee as well. And I like how, yes, there's the joke that there's no refunds and no exchanges, but when he says everybody grows into it eventually, it's like reading between the lines. He means everybody's going to grow up to, you're going to be a hero. The moment comes, you're going to answer it.
The entire reason that Spider-Man exists is to make him more appealing to the general audience, a guy with normal foibles.
Right, and he sees, meanwhile, there's the big funeral for Peter Parker. MJ shows up. Miles goes there that night, and he's feeling guilty because he feels responsible for what happened. And then Peter B. Parker suddenly shows up, and Miles initially freaks out and tries to attack him, nearly knocks him unconscious. He's like, oh, geez. And he realizes that he has this ability to shoot out electro webs, and he's super nervous, or go invisible when he's really vulnerable or whatnot. The cops show up and try and arrest them, and through a ridiculous set of shenanigans, they end up getting their webs attached to a train. They take off, and eventually they go to a diner, and Peter's telling him all about his life, and we have the big flashback where it's, let me start from the beginning, and the comic flips open. Something they do a lot in the sequel and in this movie. They do
in the sequel as well.
For other characters, yes. And so you get to see, basically, like we mentioned before, that Peter B. Parker has a lot of parallels with the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, and he's like, "Okay, kid, I'll train you, whatever, blah blah blah." Because he's like, because when Miles shows him the flash drive, that he's like, "Oh, you can. There's a collider. I can get back to my world. Great." But when he sees that he broke it, he's really upset, and he's like, "God damn it, we're gonna have to go and get another one." And so Miles is like, "Oh, I'm coming with you," blah blah. So they go off into the woods to the Alchemax labs, where they have to, that's a name they use a lot in the sequel as well, because that's the lab apparently that Kingpin was outsourcing the information, the work.
Do you know if it's from the comics? I don't know.
I don't know, but they use it. Oh, I think it might be, because I don't know. The spot is from as well. So
somebody in the chat who tell us.
So they sneak into the lab, but Peter didn't realize that, or Peter B. Parker didn't realize that Kingpin was showing up. So Miles goes in there to warn him. Together, they end up trying to steal the files from the scientist's computer. We find out that the scientist is actually Olivia Octavius.
Yes,
Lady Doc.
She is hot. She is hot.
She's aware of that. She built the collider for Kingpin, and she's aware of the fact that the reason Peter B. Parker is kind of glitching out and stuff is because he doesn't belong in this universe. It's like your molecules are going to dissolve down to nothingness, and she wants to basically watch it happen, like sadist. Oh geez. But Miles.
No, she's a scientist, and she doesn't care what human flesh she has to cut through.
And then as they're fleeing, Peter B. Parker insists that they steal bagels. So they go to the cafeteria. Miles takes one of the bagels and throws it at somebody, which becomes a big sticking point in the sequel. Chucking this bagel at this guy.
Okay, so here's an interesting thing about this particular sequence. It is sort of a meme, sort of an understanding, but it's also one of the most creative things that has ever been done in animation that I think is great. Because it was done flippantly. Now that I've said the same thing non-coherently 7 times, let me explain. So, Peter and Miles go into Fisk Corp, and then they say, okay, the last thing we're going to do is get a bagel. And as they are running out of the Fisk corp. They throw the bagel back at a person that they are chasing them. As it hits them in the head, it bonks off of their head, but instead of saying bonk, it says bagel. It was left in there as an animation joke, and everyone thought it was going to get, and they were like, no, that's hilarious. What happens with the bagel in the second one? You know what? Don't tell me. Spoilers.
Yeah, okay, I won't tell you. But it's not so much the bagel as the person that it hits.
Is it the guy who got hit with the bagel?
The guy who got hit with the bagel is what
happened. What happened?
You'll see in the sequel. Anyway, so they flee with the stuff into the woods. Lady Doc Kingpin is there, and he sees these other Spider-Man. He's like, "What's going on?" And she's like, "Well, they came from the collider." And he's like, "My collider." She's like, "Our collider." And he's like, "Well, I'm the one who pays the bills." Blah blah blah. She's like, "Well, do you want your family back?" And he's like, "Yeah, well, then go get them." So, and that's how we found out, of course, that the reason Kingpin is doing this is because his wife and kid got killed when
Vanessa.
Vanessa got killed when they found out that he was actually a monster, and they caught him trying to kill Spider-Man, and they fled and got killed in a car crash. And so he's trying to find a different Vanessa and kid from a different universe to save or to bring into his own world.
True.
So as Peter and Miles are fleeing through the woods, they end up being pursued
sympathetic villain. Kingpin sympathetic.
Yes, they're pursued by Lady Doc Ock, and they are rescued by Gwen Stacy who's Spider-Woman from another dimension. And
have you seen Lady Doc Ock's tentacles? Like, they're not as mechanical as Dude Doc Ock's. They're a little bit more. They're more gentle. I think that I would enjoy her embrace.
Oh, okay. So anyway, Gwen helps them escape Lady Doc Ock, and they flee to Aunt May's house. And that's where they have the moment where Peter tells her, "Well, I'm not your Peter," and she doesn't really care. She's like, "I'm wondering when you were going to show up," and they're like, "What?" And so they go to the backyard, and she's opening up the high-tech shed, and Peter's like, "Oh yeah, I got one of these too." But then they go down the elevator, and you find what is basically the Batcave for Spider-Man, and that's where we meet the other Spider people: Spider-Man Noir, Peter Porker, and then the anime chick with the big the robot that kind of reminds me of the robot thing from BioShock. Because that was also operated by the little kid in that video game series. And so we learned. You don't remember? Okay, never mind. So
no, but what are you talking about? Sorry, I was responding to Matt G in the chat.
The anime, the girl, the Japanese girl, she's operating hers like a robot, but it's AI and it can communicate with her. Yeah, that reminds me of the thing in BioShock where you have the little girl and the big robot.
Oh yeah, the big daddies.
Yeah, that's what that reminded me of when I first saw the movie. It still does, because it was like this similar type of protective type relationship between them. And we get there.
No, I was fascinated by and they kick ass. Like one of the things that I really sorry to interrupt you completely, but I was looking forward to every one of these characters to like be Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
And that when I was like, okay, so there's anime girl with BioShock robot.
I was, and each of the three of the other Spider-Mans there, we get their backstory, which is the same thing, opening up a comic book. Let me start from the beginning, and I like the different twists on each one, particularly Spider Noir. That was one of my favorites, and but then when they're having this conversation in the basement there, they all have kind of decide that Miles they don't think he's ready for this responsibility. And Miles overhears them and gets upset and flees. He goes back running to Aaron's house instead. And that's where he finds out that his Uncle Aaron is the Prowler who had been sent after him by the Kingpin. He flees back to Aunt May's house and he bursts into the front door where we see that Spider Noir is on the couch playing with a Rubik's Cube, trying to figure it out. He's like all fascinated with it, and the others are just kind of milling around.
Oh, why did you bring that up? Why did you say that name? Okay, so how do you feel about Spider-Man Noir playing with the Rubik's Cube?
I thought it was really funny.
I did too. I thought it was adorable.
Even though it's black, he'd seeing it in black and white. You'd still see the different shades of black and white. So he still could theoretically do it. Because
Yes.
you're black and white, like it's black, white, and grays, so you would be able to, still be able to do it. But I thought it was still really funny that.
No argument. No argument. Keep going. Keep going.
So Miles bursts in the door. He's like, my uncle's the Prowler, and he doesn't, and he's trying to kill me, and and Noir's like, man, it's a pretty hardcore origin story. And then Peter immediately is like, well, did they follow you? He's like, I don't think so. And then in walks the Rhino Tombstone, or not the Rhino, Scorpion.
Oh, it's crazy.
And Prowler. There's a big battle. The house basically gets blown to bits, and Prowler ends up grabbing Miles and unmasking him on top of the roof. And Aaron hesitates because he can't believe that it's Miles. And Kingpin shoots Aaron dead for not killing Miles. And as Aaron is dying in the alley, having tumbled off the roof, he tells Miles to, keep going. So he tells him to keep going, and Kingpin flees. The other villains flee, and that's when Miles' dad shows up. Jefferson Davis, that's right, I was remembering his name, and he finds his brother dying, sees him in the Prowler outfit, but he mistakenly thought the Spider-Man killed him, and he gets really angry and calls an APB out for Spider-Man. So
your father was killed by his own blade.
Yeah,
his glider.
So Miles runs back to his apartment where the other Spider-Men show up, and they go to hide at his apartment, more like it. And when Miles' roommate walks in, they try and hide on the ceiling.
Hey, whatever.
And that's when the Porky's like, the animal's talking. So he passes out in the bed, and then that's when they decide that Miles really isn't ready for this, and he can't come with us. So the other Spider-Men leave, and Peter
Miles ain't ready for this.
Yeah, so Peter tries to restrain him and says, if you're ready for this, then get past me. Like, do your electric webs or whatever.
Oh, sure.
And he can't do it. So then he ties him up in the chair and he leaves him there. He's like, it's for your own good, kid. And then we see that the other Spider-Men are actually lingering outside the window, and they're like, oh, man.
No, wait, wrong answer.
What?
Sorry.
Yeah, so they take off to go through with the mission, which is to take the flash drive that they stole from the lab to reactivate the collider and send them all home, and leaving Miles behind. And as Miles is stuck in the chair trying to break free, his father shows up outside the door and says, Miles, something happened. And he's like, I can see your shadow. I know you're in there. And he's like, look, Miles, sometimes people drift apart. And yeah, that really great scene, really well shot and acted.
Shot and acted, animated, and vocally performed.
You know what I mean. So
I know, but I think that there is a differentiation. There is something.
So as Davis leaves, Miles ends up finally being able to do it. He breaks the webs away, and he takes off back to Aunt May's. And she's like, I was wondering when you were going to show up. So he gets his own suit. And then we go to we reunite with the other Spider-Men who are going to this big gala, which Kingpin is throwing, like, sort of in Spider-Man's honor. And all the waiters and the maitre d's are wearing Spider-Man outfits where they're like, yeah, this is kind of macabre, but I can see what he's doing, trying to play the crowd, so to speak. MJ's even there, which causes Peter B. Parker to have that, cathartic moment I spoke of. And Gwen trying to pull him away, where she's like, she's not your MJ. Come on, we got to go. And they're like, is this really going to work, us hiding under the plates and wearing the mask? Like, wow, it's really working. So they end up going into the basement. The collider's being turned back on. They're all set trying to go home, but they get spotted and ambushed by Kingpin and Lady Doc Ock. Miles shows up to save them, and they're all surprised and proud that Miles is there to help. And he ends up successfully sending the Spider-Men back into their own dimensions, with Miles and Peter B kind of having like a moment to share, like brother, like kind of, and he ends up departing, and Gwen ends up departing. And when they're gone, like the last thing Peter tells him is, you can't face Kingpin alone. He's like, yes, I can. You taught me. Like, I got this. And so he does have to face Kingpin alone. And for some reason, his father suddenly shows up in the control room, seeing what's going on, seeing Spider-Man fight Kingpin, and realizes that this whole thing is Kingpin.
Oh, they do have a logical progression for that. I remember being impressed by the craftsmanship of the film. Everybody gets to where they're supposed to be, and I'm like, I can't believe that worked.
And then I believe I remember correctly, Miles defeats Kingpin by like throwing him into the controls or something on the collider to break it, because it does blow up. The collider gets destroyed. The multiverse threat ends, because we've seen that all of these glitches have now been spreading across the city, and they all get, at one point,
everyone's been spastic.
Yeah, everybody's watching it. They're like, "Hey, is that a Banksy?" It's kind of funny.
That was funny. Yeah,
that was funny. A joke they repeat in the sequel and get away with. I'm surprised by. So, all of that gets, everything's back to normal.
Is
sort
Banksy still at large?
Yes, and so Miles ends up, having that moment with his dad or Spider-Man, or the Spider-Man Miles Morales has the moment with Jefferson, and Jefferson doesn't really get what this is about, but he can tell that this is like a little kid, and they're kind of having a moment. And he sees that Spider-Man has left him Kingpin as evidence, which or as the culprit, which kind of reminded me of the moment from Batman Begins when Batman has left Falcone, because Davis seemed kind of disappointed, like discouraged, like, oh, we're not going to get Kingpin for this or whatever. But nope, he's up there. Spider-Man left him for you, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and leaves a note which says that to that effect, much like in Homecoming when he catches the Vulture and leaves that, courtesy of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. So then they end the movie with let's start from the beginning. I'm Miles Morales and blah, 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 and running through his whole origin. And the film ends with Miles back at home, and he hears Gwen suddenly talking to him through the multiverse. And he doesn't know, like, what's going on, kind of tripping. And then there's a post-credit. The mid-credits bit is great because it's a tribute to Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. And Stan Lee's quote about how anybody could be here, which is really great. And then the post-credit scene is Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, landing in the 1967 animated Spider-Man universe, doing the pointing meme thing.
Wait. Was there a post-credit scene in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse?
I literally just explained what it was. It was Miguel O'Hara.
I never saw that. I never saw it.
Yeah, they introduced him as Spider-Man 2099, and he ends up going back to the animated universe of the 67 Spider-Man series, and he ends up getting stuck doing the argument with the other Spider-Man, doing the pointy meme from that episode. And you have Jameson there, and the guys are watching, trying to figure out what's going on. And it's
I never saw it.
Comical bit. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I never saw it. And I feel totally embarrassed because, Kat, there are times on the internet that I claim to be an expert about something. I would like to take this moment to say I am no Spider-Man expert.
Yeah, well, it's no big deal. You didn't watch the post-credit scene, whatever. It doesn't matter.
Well, no, but I feel like I didn't see the whole movie.
Well, I did remind you that there was one, but maybe you forgot by the time you watched it.
Yeah. Like, it's an animated movie, and ultimately, when it came down to it, I was just like, oh, what a lovely strobe light. But it worked. It worked. It made me feel the feelings. It made me feel excited, but I felt like it was more of a strobe light than it was anything else. There's something about the manufacturer nature of animation that I'm like, okay, you did exactly what you wanted. And there is no way you can mess it up. This is how we show you how to feel. We'll put music and sound effects with it, and you will feel exactly how you are meant to feel.
Just like a live action film.
Incorrect. Well,
they use live music and sound effects to try and twist, manipulate you into feeling things you might not otherwise feel.
Agreed. However, the visual specificity is different. The ability to control the visual, even the most micro facial differences. The way an actor looks.
Well, actors in live action also, deliberately try and manipulate you when they're, acting.
No, I know, but what if you wanted, I don't know, let's say John Hamm, but you wanted John Hamm to be just a little bit thinner. Well, then you get Eric from The Little Mermaid. but he's animated.
You kind of lost me there. I think
You don't. I'm just saying, like, if you can specify the physicality of an individual and say, I want him to look like this and also like this, and then putting them together, that's animation. If you are putting an individual into a role and they inhabit the role, it's about the
Well, it's kind of like when
individual.
you storyboard a movie and they're trying to a live action movie and they're trying to make it look as close to that as they can with real actors and real sets.
Right. But what if you can change it? What if you can digitally alter it?
Well, sometimes they do that these days. Like when they wanted to make Steve Rogers.
Like when they make Spider-Man into the
like when they wanted to make Steve Rogers look like a skinny wimp at the beginning of the first Avenger, and then you see how he actually, like, that was a version of that. I mean, I don't think the CG was very good at trying to make him look skinny or whatever, but they kind of pulled it off. But they did that there. Or
he kind of had a bobblehead. Mm-hmm.
The aging technology is another version of that.
How do you feel about the de-aging?
That's a technology which is rapidly advanced over the last several years in terms of looking really bad when they first started to. Because I've never had a problem in a live action movie with simply casting a different actor to play the young part. I can suspend my disbelief because I get the obvious that they can't literally rewind time to make them younger, and I've never had a problem with that. But some of the de-aging, or like I remember watching the trailers for Indiana Jones, and some of it like some of the de-aging doesn't work, or certain shots do work. So it's not quite there yet. So I'm not like super on board with it or in favor of it, like in The Irishman, where they're trying to de-age everybody, but you can still tell they're like 70, 80-year-old guys.
No, but Kat, I think that Timothy Dalton is actually older than Patrick Stewart. I don't know.
Yeah, and what of it?
Well, I would cast Timothy Dalton to play a young Patrick Stewart.
Okay.
Like, I think if people were to remake Star Trek The Next Generation, I would be like, Timothy Dalton should be Captain Picard. And it's like, he's older.
Well, that doesn't matter, because sometimes people look age for the longest time, whether that's them looking really old or it's them looking really young. So, that can happen.
Right.
Is there any comments in the chat?
No one's here.
Didn't you say there was a guy named Matt in the chat?
There is a guy named Matt G in the chat.
Look and see, because I'm not quite sure if there's. Okay, we do have quite a few.
What are you talking about?
Okay, so they had a few. Then Canadian Spider-Man is here. Hello, Canadian Spider-Man.
Hello.
Matt G says, as I was telling others, I just got back from the theater seeing Across the Spider-Verse and also saw Labyrinth doubleheader. Nice.
How do you feel about Labyrinth?
I've not seen it.
You've never seen Labyrinth?
No, but I have a digital copy, so I will get to that.
Okay. Is it edited by Disney?
I don't know. Is it a Disney movie? Does they own it?
I don't know. I've never. Well, I've only seen Labyrinth once.
Okay.
I saw it in the theater.
How many webs are we going to give the film?
Out of 10?
Well, yeah, that's our typical scale.
I'd give it an 8. This is a good movie.
I would give it a 9. I give it 9 webs. I thought it was really good, but I still feel that since it's a good story in terms of the partnerships and stuff, but it's still multiverse, relying on these other characters rather than just being Miles. So I give it a 9. But it's still a very good movie. Very good.
I give it 8 as a movie, and I give it a 4 as a Spider-Man movie.
Really? How's that?
Because I didn't get to... I was watching Hogan's Heroes.
What do you mean?
Like, it's a great movie. It's a great movie, but it's like my interest in Spider-Man is Peter Parker, and this was a Dirty Dozen, like, Great Escape collective, and that's fine. That's fine.
So averaging out, it would between your 8 as a movie and 4 as a Spider-Man, it's a 6. Like overall, when you take both into consideration, it's like a 6.
Yeah, mathematically, I suppose you're correct. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So I really enjoyed it. I liked that being my introduction to Miles Morales. I had a fun time with it, and I can't wait to talk about the second one with you when you eventually get to seeing it.
It's hard, to go to a theater and watch a cartoon as a single middle-aged man. I don't want to do that. I need to find a date to go to a movie
Well,
with.
here's the thing. Yesterday I was talking about this on Tim's Talk, and one of the guys, Dylan, was saying that there's a lot of animated films in terms of anime and manga which are not for kids. Just because something is animated does not by default. Yes, most of the time animated stuff has been made geared towards kids, but not by default every time. And
No, I understand. I get it, but what I'm saying is, like, based on the demographic of my town and
right.
the theater that I go to, I understand that when I walk in, the crowd that is there is going to be a familial crowd. I am a pothead alcoholic. So when I go in, I'm looking for a Spider-Man movie.
Well,
and
you'll kind of fit
these
in because
people,
you'll
they're looking. Well, let me finish.
you'll fit in as like the Peter B. Parker of the audience.
Well, I don't want to cosplay.
You don't have to.
I'm just saying it's not going to work. It's not going to work. I'm not going there.
Well, then I guess Steve and I are going to have to do it, or I'll find somebody else to do it because I'm going to get.
Well, fine. I don't care. I already said.
I don't think you're going to like it anyway.
You don't think I'm going to like it? Okay.
Well, I
you
mean,
know what? Now I want to see it. Now I want to see it.
Well, this one, because the sequel is much more multiverse related and about the multiverse than the first one.
Yeah.
And about all the other Spider-Men, but it tells a really great story.
I bet. Like, the first one tells a really good story. Ish.
And I know you're aversion to watching the first half of a 2-part movie until both halves are available.
I'm not worried about a cliffhanger, though. No, I'm not averse to this. When I've heard that Across the Spider-Verse is a cliffhanger leading into the trilogy, no, I'm fine with that. I'm intrigued.
Well, you didn't want to see Dune in the theaters or see it at all until the second one came out.
Well, but I understood that the finale of the climax of the story was going to be a subsequent film. There was no conclusion to the first Dune, as far as I understood.
True.
And so I always thought that it was a gamble that paid off.
All right. So yeah.
So that's it.
Yeah, I love the movie. One of the best one of the best Spider-Man films as a standalone. I really connected with it. The pacing and the way it jumps right into the story, it sets up the emotional beats really well. And I like that the story is not so much about Spider-Man versus the villain. It's about Miles kind of coming into being Spider-Man and how he's learning to kind of cope with that. It's sort of like how as I mentioned in the first half of Spider-Man 1 with Tobey Maguire, it's really good. It's origin-based, it's character-driven, and then the second half, it's pretty much all Spider-Man versus Green Goblin and those types of little things. Same thing in The Amazing Spider-Man. The first half is basically retelling the origin story beat for beat with a slightly different twist on the characters, but then the second half is just him and Lizard pretty much in the whole Lizard plot. It's like the movie, there's like a tonal, like a noticeable shift in terms of what the story is about. And I felt that this one kept the story focused pretty much on Miles and his and the problems he's having with trying to like now that he's Spider-Man, rather than ever becoming about Spider-Man versus the bad guy or the bad guy's evil plot, you know. And because it managed to stick that landing of staying on the same focus track for the whole way through, keeping its focus on the one thing, I think it works really well. Like, it doesn't feel like there's a midway point where it goes from being like a Miles Morales Spider-Man story to suddenly being like about like Spider-Man versus Kingpin story or whatnot, you know?
I don't like that Miles got his web shooters as gifts.
True, but again, I'm not, because again, I don't know if Miles Morales in his comics was there a Peter Parker from the Miles Morales universe in the comics?
No, I don't know. Like, in the comics, I don't know where he got his web shooters.
Yeah, like, I don't know if Peter Parker existed in that universe as well or not.
Oh, no, Peter Parker did exist in that universe. It was the Ultimate Universe. That's where Miles Morales...
Okay, so that is there. So I haven't read that.
So they must have... Well, I didn't... You know, I stopped reading. At that point, I had discovered girls.
Well, it was also the fact that it was Peter B. Parker, the one who gave him the web shooters, right? Or was it the first?
Yes, it was Peter B. in the movie, yes.
Okay, yeah. So that was kind of almost like him passing the mantle or giving up. He's like, I'm done with this. You do it.
But I'm talking about the comics and quite honestly, Catherine, I think that if I am going to be talking about something that is across the multiverse,
I mean, in the context of the film, Peter B giving him the web shooters is him kind of like giving up. And by the end of the film, Miles has convinced him not to give up. It's like, no, you're still Spider-Man, which is like one of the last things he tells him before he sends him back home to his own dimension.
Well, it all works out.
Yeah. So very good movie. I loved it. I think this new one's going to crush it.
I give it a 6 based on the qualifications that Kat applied.
Yep, that's your average between the two. So I would give this a 9.
All right. Well, anything else?
Unless Steve has pictures of Spider-Man for us, which I don't think he does.
No.
Go get him, Tiger.
Really? Already?
I don't